Welcome back to the program. Thanks so much for being with us. I want you to welcome back. We've got Charlie Collins on the line. Charlie is the State Revenue Commissioner. Merry Christmas, Charlie. How are you?
Merry Christmas for you, Paul. I'm doing fantastic.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear it. It's been a while since we had you on the program. I think the last time we had you on, you were serving in elected office as state representative. And I understand, I know the election didn't work out the way you wanted it to last time, but now you're in state government. What can you tell us about that transition? How are those roles different for you?
That's a great question, Paul. And I remember when I was first elected to the legislature, I'd heard a lot of, discussion about elected people and whatnot, and kind of had some of those preconceptions. And I remember when I actually got in to do the work alongside the other state representatives and state senators, my overall feeling was of being impressed with the people as individuals and being impressed with the way the institution functioned. And one of those things that just always stuck out in my mind was, just like the founders intended, no one individual in that legislature has control over the other individuals. You really do need to find some type of consensus or change or policy differences, etc., just aren't going to move forward. So I remember being just really happily overwhelmed with how true that was. And I would say that it's been similar moving into state government. The people that I get a chance to interact with and work with, very good hearts, just doing all they can to try to make things better for the people of Arkansas. And the distinctions between the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, you can almost feel those in terms of how things get done and how things move forward. So, I would just report that the American system is extremely healthy and thriving, particularly here in Arkansas.
Again, we're talking with State Revenue Commissioner Charlie Collins. Now, I saw you were mentioned in this article about car washes, and you have this business owner by the name of Wade Dunn, who there's this new car wash tax that's out there where it's a tax on water, and he can't figure out how much he's supposed to pay. And there's some. Why don't you just tell us, like, what exactly is Mr. Dunn's problem here?
So, if we talk about this particular law, I think it was I personally thought it was a very good bill. The bill did several things, including lower the corporate income tax. Paul, I think you and I both know how important it is to lower those marginal tax rates on individuals and businesses to help incentivize and generate even more economic activity. Other elements of that bill changed some of the more restrictive regulations on businesses in terms of how taxes were treated. For example, something called net operating loss carry forward, where Arkansas system was more restrictive than a lot of the states around us. That was expanded to be closer to some of the other states around us. And there were some other elements of that bill. And as your listeners can probably tell, as I described some of those corporate business change improvements in the bill, this was a very complicated and technical thing because, frankly, that tax code can be quite involved and complicated. Well, one of the elements that the legislature chose to put in the bill were some changes to the way car washes were taxed. One of the things that happens over long periods of time is, just like you build a house and you add on rooms and you add on different things to what the structure already was, that's the way that the car wash tax had evolved in Arkansas over the decades as new technologies were used. So the legislature tried to modernize that, and I think they did. The net change is about $3 million tax cut for car washes overall. One of the elements of the program is a fee on water usage. So the challenge comes if your water meter goes to something besides just your car wash. And there are a few businesses in Arkansas, including the business owner that you're describing, where that's the case. And so I think that's the reason that's a little bit more challenging. But I'm very confident that working together and talking with the business owner, we're going to be able to get to a satisfactory place. That's something that always happens with people that have good heart and good intention. That's certainly what DF&A has, and I believe that's also what this business owner has.
Well, so, I mean, yeah, I hope it works out. I hope, he wants to know how much money he owes, and it's difficult. I feel like this is, just we have unintended consequences, and we had a lot. You just said, Charlie, we had a lot of moving parts in this piece of legislation, and it kind of is, confusing. I mean, for example, I was in the committee. I mean, when all this was being debated, I was watching. I had no idea that there were different types of car washes, and you had full service car washes that were maybe subject to this tax that automated car washes were not, and there was kind of a little bit of competition between those two business models, if you will. And that's why I think the automated guys fought this, because they were kind of thinking like, I don't know if we, should tax me based on water usage, I mean, did you know that there were these two competing? To me, they seemed like they were two business models competing with one another, and one got the legislation they wanted, and the other not so much.
Well, I think there are even more than two. If I would share with you how I look at it in terms of how I think about it, you've got car washes which are clearly service oriented, where you've got people there doing the work, and so that one, for some of those, it didn't change very much at all. The ones that were doing a lot of the discussing, they might have fit maybe a couple of the models you talked about, but they're even more than that. And as that technology changes in that industry or any other, the legislature, of course, is free to make changes in how they design to tax and do other things with those industries. So we're happy to just implement the law. And when we have a new law in a complex area, sometimes it takes a little bit before everybody involved has alignment on the right way to move forward. The reality is we've got something like 80,000 businesses that are registered taxpayers in Arkansas, and when you have that many businesses, the good news is the thumbs up part is, we're thriving as a state. We're creating jobs as a state. People are going to work as a state. That means that since business is healthy, even as we're making these changes to lower tax rates, we're still doing well in terms of collecting revenue to pay for the essential services of the state. And we're going to work through all of these things and come to fair and satisfactory outcomes for everybody involved. I'm very highly confident of that.
We're talking again, folks, with Charlie Collins. He's former state representative. Now he's the state revenue commissioner here in the state of Arkansas. So, Charlie, I know you were a strong advocate back when you were in elected office back in 2017 and maybe even before. You were a proponent of this internet sales tax, and I was not, but it's here now. Okay, it's in this piece of legislation that lowered the corporate tax and did this car wash situation, and we have now this tax that we can levy on out-of-state sellers. And I, believe, I've seen some local headlines from around the state from counties and cities that there's reporting out there, and they are attributing some increase in sales tax collections to this new amount of revenue coming from online sales, because everybody knows people are buying online more and more and more every single day. And I'm wanting to get a figure at some point, and from what I've heard that the state isn't really able to tell how much more money is coming in as a result of the internet sales tax. Is that true? Do you know? Is there any way we'll know as a state how much more revenue we've gotten because of the internet sales tax?
So here's what I would share, trying to address a lot of the things that you just mentioned. Number one, what you're describing is, again, another great topic on how changing technology changes how government needs to operate, implement, and execute in order to make sure we're fairly doing the business of the people of Arkansas. When we passed our sales and use tax law, I believe it was 1949, the issue was not internet taxing. It was, guess what, catalogs, right? So the opportunity that people might have thought when they bought something out of state, that if the catalogs did not collect the sales tax, then, what was the result? And Arkansas law is very clear that when you bought something back in the 1950s, whether it was from a catalog who did not collect and remit the sales tax. In other words, unlike when you go to the grocery store or the drugstore, those stores, when you ring out your cash register receipt, just has the collection of the tax on it. If you bought from a catalog in those days, some did and some didn't. But if they did not collect and remit, you still owed the tax because the tax applied regardless of whether the seller collected and remitted. So the issue that we were talking about back in 2010 or 2011, 2013, 15, 17, and on was never about a new tax. It was never about an additional tax, and it was never about whether a tax was related to a type of purchasing. It was always who was to collect and remit the tax. That was always what the discussion was. And as you said, now the online sellers, as long as they have a certain number of transactions, a certain amount of business, they're responsible, just like brick and mortar stores are, to collect and remit that tax. And as you said, because that segment of the market is growing so fast, the taxes in that segment of the market are going up. In Arkansas, they're going up at a high rate because we had some online sellers who voluntarily collected and remitted taxes. But since the law changed, we've got many more that are registered and collecting and remitting. So there's no question that the tax collections from online are going up. I think the question would be how much of that is incremental, i.e., more overall sales, and how much of it is sales shifting, which is sales taxes we might have collected 5 years ago from a brick and mortar store, which are no longer being made at a brick and mortar store and moving over to online. The other thing that's going on there is the fast change in those businesses in terms of the models and new businesses forming and other businesses rolling into other businesses. So there's a lot of complexity there, but I think the overall answer is sales taxes, and we report those every month, are going up, not too different overall from the forecast that we've made so far this year, as a sign of a healthy economy, as a sign that our Kansans are continue to purchase goods and services, and yes, the online portion is growing at a healthy clip. Overall, we're growing at not too different from the forecasted clip.
So, to be clear, we don't really. Are you just saying it's too complex for us to get a knowable figure of?
Well, we're not. One thing we can't do, obviously, is talk about individual businesses or subsets of businesses that would in any way, expose any businesses, tax situation in any way. So, is there a way, after the fact, once we've had a certain amount of data collection to try and go do some analyses and say, in this collection of businesses, in a previous time we got this much. I think it's a good idea. I may look at that just to see if we can get some insight. But on a running basis, we're aggregating up from all the taxpayers as we collect revenues. Those get aggregated, and we'd have to find some way to do some type of analysis where we completely protected any individual taxpayers and look at them by groups. And it's really pretty early to have that kind of analysis and draw conclusions beyond the broader conclusions which I'm sharing you now, which is overall sales tax collections in Arkansas are healthy. They're not that different than the forecast, and we definitely see the growth in online sales, just as you can see that reported on CNBC and other places. Those trends are definitely affecting Arkansas.
So, do you agree, or do you remember, I think it was State Representative Dan Douglas on the House floor earlier this year. Man, I can't believe it's the end of the year. That's crazy. But, you know, he was asked back when they passed this particular law that put into effect, you know, this new revenue stream, you know, the state taxing out-of-state sellers, and they're passing the cost on to us. He said the estimate was a wag. He said it was a quote, wild-ass guess, the estimate of how much money this was going to generate, how much new revenue growth this was going to generate. He didn't say that. Well, I don't know if it was said in committee, but I know it was said on the House floor. So what was that estimate? The Department of Finance and Administration, was it just a wild guess?
No, in my view and in my experience, the Department of Finance Administration Arkansas does some of the best forecasting, and their methods are as good as it gets. I really love the forecast and the fiscal impacts that DFNA does on income tax. And the reason I love that is because we have the ability to say, in year X, 2017 or whatever year it is, you know, we ran all the tax returns in Arkansas using the tax laws as they existed. To do an impact statement on an income tax law change, we can go reprogram our system to pretend the changes were in effect for that tax year, run the whole thing again with those changes, get the new collections that would have shown up on the returns, and compare that to what we actually got and give a concrete estimate that far surpasses any other method that anybody else could ever do in any type of tax, in my view. Now, that would be for an income tax change. We have that kind of a tool and methodology where we can really be extraordinarily confident that the forecast and the estimate is just such a superior method that, barring some outside changes, exogenous variables, as we like to say in economics, that barring that, the estimate is going to be solid as a rock. Now, when you move away from that into other things, you talked about car washes earlier, which is a brand new area, and measuring water and trying to estimate what or in this scenario where you have multiple moving parts, you have new people on registering online, you have changes within the online selling market, and I'll give you one of the examples. Years ago, I think Amazon and retailers like Amazon might sell most of their business direct, and then they got into a model that included more third-party sellers, where third-party sellers are selling on a platform. You have companies like Shopify, which is another type of online model. You have a lot of traditional retailers which are expanding and beefing up their online businesses. So there are so many changes going on that to try to single out one element and attribute all of that change to the fact that the tax is now being collected and remitted, I think that's where it gets tougher to say, you know, the number is, you know, rounded to the nearest tenth of a decimal place. If online shopping was stable as a percentage of total shopping, which it's not, because as we all know, there's a shift toward online. If the online industry was mature, which it's not, but if it was mature, then the way that worked would all be very consistent from year to year. The industry itself would not be evolving and growing and innovating the way it is. And if the economy was flat, in other words, not growing overall, so that the revenue we collected in one year would be similar to the revenue we collected in the following year, it would be much easier to try and say the amount of increase in revenue of X is due to this one or two factors. But since we have all of those moving parts, fortunately for us, they're all positives. The economy is growing because the economy is healthy. The online industry is growing and evolving because great technology. So it's that puts me in a position where I hate to try and say, you know, the estimate is perfect or it's not perfect or it's due specifically to this one thing. But overall, the sales tax forecast at Arkansas is pretty much on track. with what we projected overall, net.
So again, I know we're running out of time here, but I while I have you, I'm trying to understand. So you mentioned that we have these businesses are registering with the state.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
how do you know? And maybe this might help maybe get a knowable figure for how much more money the state's getting because of this new law that has to do with the internet. If somebody doesn't pay what they owe, how do you know it?
Well, obviously we have laws in the country, and people are expected to follow the laws, and we have every reason to believe that's exactly what's happening. So as new businesses form who meet and others grow to the point where they meet the qualifications of needing to register, then those businesses then go ahead and do that in Arkansas. So if you only sell, let's say 10 transactions a month, then you don't need to register with the state of Arkansas. But if your business takes off and you meet those minimum thresholds, then you need to register. Obviously, the bigger the business and, the more impact it's having in terms of growing sales, et cetera, the more it's just going to be out in the news in other areas. And as businesses get bigger, they just, start paying attention to more things. So if you're suggesting there may be a business somewhere that, should be registered and didn't register because they just crossed one of those minimum thresholds or something like that, but our experience is business owners are trying to do the right thing. People are trying to follow the law. DFA is not in a gotcha game. We do not look at the world that way. We're not here to do gotchas. We're here for one reason. We serve the people of Arkansas. And in the revenue division, we've got the tax arena. We've also got the revenue offices, so think about drivers and car registrations, et cetera. We've also got the Office of Child Support Enforcement. All of these areas touch, so many Arkansans that I would just look at it from the standpoint of we in the revenue division, in many ways, are focused on customer service, trying to make the customer service here in Arkansas as great as it can be for the individuals of Arkansas and for the taxpayers of Arkansas, so that everybody is being treated fairly. And if you're making money and you're paying your taxes, you can count on the fact that we're doing everything we can to make sure that that same outcome is happening across the board. But it's not a gotcha type of approach. It is we're all in this together, and we need to serve our customers well and make sure that everybody is following the rules in a consistent fashion.
Charlie,
and, that's
Charlie
what we're here
Collins,
to do.
State Revenue Commissioner. Charlie, thanks for coming on. Thanks for letting me prod you with questions, and Merry Christmas, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. Merry Christmas.
All righty, folks, we're going to take a break.